Ashkelon, on Israel's Mediterranean coast. I'm told evening is when I can meet some of the town's poorest people. They're starting to sell things off cheap tonight as they pack up the market. You can see some of the traders just piling stuff up. The stallholders dump the food they can't sell. It's not long before elderly people start picking through it. One of them shows me his ID. He's a Holocaust survivor. He asks us not to show his face. Are there many Holocaust survivors who come here?
יש הרבה שמגיעים לפה, בסוף היום.
Why?
כסף שמקבלים, כנראה לא מספיק להם.
Is that why you come?
בגלל זה אני בא לפה.
In all, we meet 13 Holocaust survivors scavenging for food. Germany has paid out billions of dollars since the war to help survivors across the world. But in Israel, 45,000 of these most extraordinary people live below the poverty line. And they should never have been in this position, because according to the settlements after the Second World War, they should have been looked after. The Nazis and their allies killed about 6 million Jews. Around half were gassed in concentration camps. Others were shot in a mass slaughter that unfolded across the occupied parts of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. I'm heading to the town of Lod. Hello, Melinda. I'm Krishnan. Very nice to meet you. Melinda Hirschkovitz is 82, the average age of the remaining survivors. She came to Israel in 1971. During the war, she and her family were herded into a ghetto in Oradea, in Hungary, with 30,000 other Jews. Melinda remembers the ghetto police as brutal and sadistic.
I'm very, very, very love my father.
A family from outside the ghetto hid her and her brother and mother. But the Jews who remained in the ghetto were sent to the Auschwitz concentration camp. Like all elderly people in Israel, Melinda gets a basic monthly social security payment, and her son helps as well. But she's below the poverty line. 7 decades after starving in the ghetto, she still struggles to afford food. It seems wrong that you're living like this. Does it feel wrong to you? Melinda's family lost everything in the Holocaust. She arrived in Israel poor and has remained trapped in poverty since. See you soon. My next destination is Tel Aviv. How many stairs are there?
78. I live
right on the top.
Yes.
Hadassah Hirschkovitz is 80 years old. Like many other survivors, she has struggled with basic accommodation. She shows me where she lives. This is not a real flat, is it?
זה לא היה בית, זה לא בית. זה חדר כביסה שכל הבניין.
The laundry room Hadassah's converted is tiny, damp and drafty.
Look, this is my, here I washing my, this, and this is
This is your kitchen?
Look here.
Yeah, you got a lot of fun.
This is not from...
Hadassah lived in Iasi, Romania, where in a single day in 1941, 10,000 Jews were rounded up and killed. Her parents were shot dead in front of her. She was sheltered by Christians and was among the first Holocaust survivors to reach Israel. How long have you lived here?
40 years. 40 שנה.
40?
Oh, yeah.
The flat has no heating. Hadassah says it's freezing in winter. And for food, like Melinda, she relies on charity.
לא מגיע לי להיות חיים כאלה. בגילי, אני לבד. כואב לי מה שהיה לי, וכואב לי מה שיש לי. I can't, sorry.
I'm sorry to make you think about it. Holocaust survivors in Israel are more likely to be poor than the rest of the elderly population. The thing about Hadassah is, you see her living in what's effectively a shed on top of this building, 3.5 flights of stairs up. And she's still surviving to this day. Israel is a wealthy country, so it's difficult to understand why so many survivors live in poverty. In Jerusalem, at Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Museum, I meet Dora Roth, one of the country's most vocal advocates for survivors' rights, and a survivor herself.
Stutthof was one, after Auschwitz, the biggest camp. In entrance of Stutthof was written Vernichtungslager, from here you don't go out.
Dora was held in Stutthof concentration camp for 2 years. She lost her father, mother, and sister. And on the day of liberation, aged 13, she nearly lost her own life.
The Germans came into the barracks with a machine gun. I got the 2 bullets. And when the Russian came, they saw this little girl lying in a sea of blood, and they saw she is alive. You understand that 6 million died.
Although the Holocaust is central to the story of modern Israel's foundation, Dora believes those who lived through its horror are being forgotten. In 2013, she confronted a committee of MPs in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset.
לראות בטלוויזיה שלנו ניצול שואה שאין לו חימום בחורף, שאין לו כסף לאוכל, זה הבושה שלכם בבית הזה.
Since I talked in the Knesset, I got telephone calls from Holocaust survivors, and they asked me, what did I do? They get the same amount of money, which is not enough, 20,000.
The government did agree in 2014 to spend an extra $290 million on survivors. Pension allowances and money for medical costs were increased. But Dora thinks the reforms have not gone far enough.
What is so difficult to give to that group of Holocaust survivors? There is money here.
I mean, why are people in this country not more angry about it?
This is the main problem. The people of Israel, they don't understand, or they don't want to understand what was the Holocaust. Many times I heard people saying, enough of the Holocaust, enough of the Shoah, enough of it.
There's not a lot of time to fix this, is there?
No.
Every day in Israel, around 40 survivors die, some without ever benefiting from compensation. Claiming what you're entitled to here is an absolute minefield. For Holocaust survivors, if they came here before 1953, they have to claim money from the Israeli state. If it was after that date, they go to something called the Claims Conference, which is actually based in New York. Since the war, the Claims Conference has distributed tens of billions of dollars from Germany to survivors all over the world, including Israel. Hello. The organisation has many critics.
Hi, Krishnan Guru-Murthy, very nice to meet you.
The most outspoken is former chair of the World Jewish Congress, E.C. Liebler. For years, he's been arguing that not enough of the money the Claims Conference gets reaches survivors.
A large amount of that money went to other funds, for example, for infrastructure projects, hospitals, hostels, and all sorts of other good purposes.
And what should have happened to it?
My view has always been that the #1 priority must be the survivors, and particularly now, when you're dealing with aged people in the twilight of their years, many of them living in abject poverty.
He says the Claims Conference lacks transparency. In 2009, the organisation was rocked by a massive corruption scandal.
For 15 years, there were a number of people of the Claims Conference that were skimming off money. Over $57 million was knocked off.
How much has the leadership of the Claims Conference changed since the fraud scandal?
Has not changed at all. The chairman has been there for 12 years, and it's just unheard of. The most important charity organisation in the Jewish world, and the chairman has simply stayed there.
I want to put his concerns to the Claims Conference, but first I'm visiting one of the small charities helping survivors. The Association for the Immediate Help of Holocaust Survivors looks after thousands of old people around the country now, and the Nerve Centre is a private house in this quiet suburb of Tel Aviv. Sam Ben-Nun is spending his gap year with the association. It's funded by private donations and a Swiss charity. Today, they're preparing meals for some of the poorest survivors. If you weren't sending out this kind of food to them, what do you think they'd be eating?
Well, there have been some cases that Holocaust survivors even had to go and pick food out of trash cans. That's what they would eat.
The work of the charity goes beyond food delivery. Not only are survivors more likely to be poor, but many experience conditions like post-traumatic stress and survivor guilt. These young volunteers take dozens of calls every day.
Do things get pretty heavy as well at times?
They do. Just last night, we received a call, and he said that he would like to end his life. And
you took the call?
Yeah. And it was a very heavy call. And just hours trying to convince him that everything's going to be all right and we're going to help him out.
Some studies suggest the suicide rate among survivors in Israel is 3 times that of the wider old age population. Isaac comes to the association once a week.
He lives in really terrible conditions. He doesn't have any working plumbing at all. That's why he comes here once a week, so he can take a hot shower.
And you provide him with all his meals, do you?
And we do. He comes here, he gets to eat a hot meal.
We join Isaac when he heads back home.
Come downstairs, I'll show you the time.
He's reluctant to let me into his house, but the outside of it is telling enough.
I think he's very embarrassed about where he lives.
As a child, Isaac survived the slaughter of the Jews in Ukraine. He's lived alone in Israel his whole adult life.
You keep talking to me about other Holocaust survivors being poor. How would you describe yourself?
I'm, in the middle.
The middle class, really?
Yeah. From the survivor's point of view.
Life seems pretty hard to me, looking at you.
All right, I don't go abroad, I don't go make holidays. This is my place. You understand?
Yeah. Isaac doesn't want to dwell on his own poverty, but he's keen to introduce me to the cats he feeds every day. Are they your family?
Like a family.
They're like a family, aren't they?
Yes. Holocaust survivors are like cats that in Israel not everybody appreciates them.
Isaac believes the reason many survivors are neglected is because some in Israel are ashamed of them.
They say you went to the slaughter like sheep without fighting for your lives.
Do people say that?
Young people, that's what they used to do.
They used to say that to you?
Sabras, no, to everybody. Why didn't you fight?
Holocaust survivors often faced stigma when they first arrived in Israel.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for talking to us. Many believe this made it harder for them to escape poverty. I'm catching up with Melinda again. We're heading into Tel Aviv, where she used to work as a cleaner. And where do you like going in Tel Aviv?
מטיילת שם עד שאני מסתכלת בכל מקום, זה עובר הזמן.
Every week or two, Melinda does this journey alone. Her husband died 4 years ago. How about this? The jewellers evokes painful memories.
שאמא שלי מכרה את השרשרת ככה, על המכרה שיהיה לנו מה לאכול.
The trauma of the Holocaust was so severe, many victims often re-experience it, even now, decades later. The pain is worsened by having no one to talk to. 40% of Holocaust survivors say they're lonely. Why do you like coming here now?
כי אני לא אהיה לבד כל היום. להעביר את היום.
We wanted to find out whether Melinda was able to claim from any of the various funds for survivors. So we've arranged for David Yodid to visit. He's a lawyer who helps survivors navigate the complex bureaucracy to get money from the Claims Conference and the Israeli government.
באיזה שנה נולדת?
71. From the most basic information about Melinda's case, David quickly establishes she might be due some funds.
אז עכשיו את יודעת, אפשר לקבל עכשיו עוד סכום חד פעמי, קוראים לזה ילדות השוקה, עוד 2,550 יורו. את לא קיבלת כזה דבר?
לא.
לא?
For Melinda, 2,500 euros would be the equivalent of 4 months' income. Melinda, what do you think?
אני לא יכולה עכשיו, אולי אחר כך בערב. היום אני בטח בערב, אני לא יושן. אני אשוב. עכשיו אני לא יכול.
In just 1 hour talking to Melinda, David was able to work out that there are possible funds that she could be claiming from. And it really makes you think how many people are out there not accessing money that could really make a difference to their lives for want of somebody who understands the system. I returned to Tel Aviv to try to get to the bottom of why so many survivors are still so poor when there's been so much money put aside for them. The Israeli government has refused to put up a minister to talk to us at all. The Claims Conference, on the other hand, despite all the controversy, has agreed to meet us here at their offices in Tel Aviv. I meet the organisation's vice president for Israel, Shlomo Gur. The Claims Conference channels Germany's reparations to survivors around the world. After the corruption scandal in New York was exposed, 11 former employees were prosecuted.
Isn't it extraordinary that the leader of an organisation which had a $57 million fraud didn't take any responsibility for this happening on his watch?
All those who were involved, yes. They not only are no longer with the claims conference, and quite a few of them are, while we are speaking, sitting in jail.
But the leadership is the same, isn't it? The leadership under which this happened is the same leadership today.
The president is still the same president.
Do you think the claims conference is transparent enough?
I would say yes. If you say enough, it can always be more.
Since I've been in Israel, I've met a lot of very poor Holocaust survivors. Do you think people get enough?
The short answer? No, because there's no enough.
He says the claims conference has to help survivors all over the world, and funds are limited. The other big problem is reaching out to survivors who may be due compensation, but are unaware of it.
There are so many different ways you can claim money, from the government, from you, from other organisations. To somebody in their 80s, it's very, very hard to negotiate that path, isn't it?
We will do our utmost. If nothing can be proven, then we won't be able to do it. But there are more and more tools in order to try and reach the real story.
The claims conference says no Holocaust victims were deprived of funds because of the fraud, and that they cooperated fully with investigators. The organisation says over half its annual $300 million budget in Israel goes direct to survivors, and the rest to organisations that help them. Marking the passing of survivors who have little or no family is something Sam and the other volunteers do regularly.
רות, אנחנו כאן, ניפרד ממך שוב. זה מאוד קשה. אנחנו מאוד מתגעגעים. אנחנו נזכור אותך תמיד.
It becomes very obvious here, doesn't it, that there's only a few years left in which to do something about this.
Very soon, there aren't going to be any more Holocaust survivors left. Definitely not ones that were old enough to remember what they went through.
Sam and the other volunteers are trying to make a difference for the living while they can. Today, they're preparing a birthday party for one of their favourites.
OK, so she's here, everyone's ready. I think it's going to be a big surprise. What did you think when you walked in?
מסתובב לי הראש, מרגישה טוב, אני אומרת תודה לכולם. אני לבד, בכיתי.
It's a rare chance for Melinda to have fun and share stories with people who understand. But she and the other survivors here will all return to very challenged lives.
Thanks for watching this classic Unreported World episode. Click the logo to subscribe for more award-winning documentaries from the Unreported World team. We upload videos every Sunday, keeping you up to date with content from all over the world.